Clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Here we go to the legislature now. In episode 2, we covered a lot of these legislative primaries, and I'm looking at this, and all the bold names pretty much are the ones who won here, Brian. Let's take a look and start. I think we'll start out in the House District 8. Lisa Fragola versus Doyle Canning. I think people thought this was going to be a close one, Brian. A lot of things this race was close, not one of them.
Ain't that the truth? I think it was interesting because this was, this seat had so much intensity, right, with the recall and everything, and then for it to really turn into just kind of a nothing burger is pretty interesting.
I think Doyle is sort of one of those people who belongs to like there's a little bit of a squad vibe in Oregon, and Doyle sort of belongs to it. The people that she, thanked in her thank you email that I read the other day.
This is the one that, so DeFazio came back out of the woodwork and just plowed Doyle Canning, right? Because she filed against him one time in a primary. And this is where, you kind of got to watch what you do sometimes, I guess, if you're a candidate running for office, because it can. And if you just kind of, it'll be fun to run for Congress, dink, dink, dink on somebody. And then that person came back to running TV ads against you in some lonely little state rep race. So I don't know if it was that, but I think there is a machine in Lane County for Democrats down there. That's for sure. And she was not part of it.
I think we should call it the Holvey machine, Brian. Seems like he's sort of the patriarch of that situation up there with his 90-10 recall victory. And this, close margin to that, 73-26 is pretty rough, but not as rough as it got for some others here. We're scrolling down to the 12th Republican primary. Darren Harbick versus incumbent Charlie Conrad. Not only was this a healthy victory for Harbick, Conrad got destroyed, 17% for the incumbent Republican. I'm not sure I've seen an incumbent get that low of a number in my entire political history, Brian.
Yeah, that was really, it might be the lowest an incumbent's ever gotten. And we don't have to look that up because that 17% is, 1,200 people. Those are probably 1,200 people, I think, that Jim Moore was talking about that knew who they're voting for when they showed up. They were intentional. That's what I'm guessing there. I think that, I hope that Harbick will be a good representative. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times. I think he'll be a good guy. I didn't do anything on this race. I think Right to Life really flexed their muscles in this race a little bit. And I think that Charlie really underestimated the value of what kind of litmus tests that we have in the Republican Party. And Right to Life and guns are probably the two, and I'd say really at the top of that these days is just Right to Life. I think that's I think you could even overcome a gun issue because our gun groups in this state are horrible that try to hold people accountable for gun stuff. We know how horrible Kevin Starrett is at holding people accountable to crap. So I think that Right to Life is just a way different scenario where they said, well, you know what, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And I think they had a good candidate too. I think that really helps when you have a quality candidate like Darren that stepped up and just said, this is not what I want representing the communities over here of what, Eastern Lane County kind of groups over there. It's pretty conservative. I think that Charlie was mistaken by the 4-way primary that he won 2 years ago and thinking that a centrist mentality was what people wanted in that district. And I think that's probably where he maybe went wrong, but I don't know. I don't think Charlie's a bad guy. I think that he just made a very bad decision and a bad vote and was not willing to understand the ramifications of that bad vote and wasn't really coming to terms with it. And like I said, I think when we talked about this race, I said at least now he can say he's a former state representative.
Bryan, I think also there you just look at that and you go, you really need to respond when voters are telling you something, when you're getting that response back. I mean, I know he was getting a hard time right after that vote. I mean, it took a while for them to actually get the candidate and all that stuff, and there was plenty of time for him to come off of it and say you made a mistake. And I think that would have made that race closer if he had admitted that, but he wasn't willing to admit it, so he goes down with the ship. Next close race. This one's still considered too close to call. I still think House District 16, Sammy versus Sarah. I think Sarah Finger McDonald is likely. You'd rather be her than Sammy, but I will tell you, Bryan, the trend is in the blue counties, the progressive, harder left votes come late, and in the red counties, the conservative votes show up late. So there's a chance that Sammy catches up and turns this one into a ballot curing battle. So we'll keep an eye on this one. I think, but it's the closest primary in the state, I think.
Weren't we split on this one? Didn't I take Sammy and you took Sarah?
I forgot to note who you took, but I
think I went with my conventional wisdom that the white liberals will choose the name they can't pronounce.
And I think looking like a decent prediction there, Bryan. Certainly nothing to be ashamed of there.
I'm with you. I'd rather have a 200 vote lead, than to be the one behind. There's no doubt about it. Especially this late in the game, 10,000 votes. Probably the next update. I don't think there's 200 ballots out there. 10,000 votes on a primary and in a state rep race. I can't imagine there's 200 more ballots out there. So if I were predicting this, I'd say that your next state representative there is Sarah Finger McDonald. And that's Rayfield's district in Corvallis. So it's definitely a blue district, very, very progressive, very university-ish, so it's going to have a lot of those professors voting and stuff in that district, and a very high turnout. Actually, probably one of the higher turnouts that we saw. But that's what happens when you get some contested issues like this, especially in a concentrated area like Corvallis, where a lot of people are going to turn out and makes it really easy for them to do it, to vote, right? Because they're just in Corvallis and it's just the city. There's not like even Charlie Conrad's, district, what we were just talking about is, you're going from Blue River all the way up to almost to Corvallis, right? It's like Junction City and stuff. So yeah, huge swaths of land, which is just a lot harder for people to vote. So we'll see.
From the river to the sea, or Oregon State University will be free. Is that what you're telling me, Bryan?
That's pretty good. Did you just come up with that one, or did you write that before we started?
No, I just came up with it because I'd gotten a text from somebody the other day who was at the campus and was taking a picture of the tents, and they said the Free Palestine movement has officially taken over 1/8 of an acre, and I asked if that was large enough for a Palestinian state. So anyway, just some humor there to keep people engaged on this stuff. Now we go up to Portland, House District 33. Maxine Dexter's leaving this district, and what I thought was going to happen here did happen. Shannon Jones Isidore, or Isidore, I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, wins with 51% of the vote. Would have actually won outright, but I don't think it helped that Pete Gabriel and Brian Duty were splitting the vote. Brian gets 20%, Pete gets 27%. I even saw a Pete Gabriel ad where he was basically saying he wrote Obama's climate plan or something like that. And I loved that ad because it really illustrated something that I try to put into practice in politics and try to explain to people. When you say something, whether it's true or not, it has to be believable. And I just didn't believe that this guy running for state rep in District 33 wrote Obama's climate plan. Maybe he did, but it wasn't a believable claim to me. And there was no video of Barack Obama saying, I love this guy. And so I just think it probably fell flat for me. And then I didn't see much from Brian Duty, but I know that Shannon Jones got the Willamette Week endorsement, and I think that was helpful in defining herself as a progressive. Because Bynum's leaving, she'll be the only Black woman in the Oregon House. I think that was also really good for her in terms of a campaign talking point and to really drive and build an identity with voters. And ultimately, I think that just all kind of won out.
Yeah, I think we both let in with Shannon because she got the Willamette Week endorsement, and it looked like from there was a real movement of a watershed of a lot of those progressive groups that I saw up around Portland that are just hopping on our bandwagon, like OLCV, and a lot of those ones were really getting behind her. And she just kind of moved on to it. I agree with you. That's a very interesting move. If you wrote President Obama's climate action plan, I feel like you could have got his endorsement for a race like this. If you were the guy that literally wrote the president's climate action plan, or were you just in the room and you're a footnote on writing the climate action plan? So to your point, it's a little unbelievable, which I think you're right. I think some of the voters, especially the intentional voters that Jim Moore talks about, probably knew that. I think that probably would be the case. So Shannon seemed like she's great. I think what we mentioned in this race, what we found interesting is that all three were, had super excellent resumes. Besides the fact that the Democrats, but outside of that, they had three great resumes that we saw that was pretty impressive. So, and Reagan, we just talked about 16, but the true closest primary in Oregon is the Republican nomination for House District 3. Because Stan Baumhofer, 95-year-old Stan Baumhofer, is leading Dick Corder by 23 votes as we talk. For their
Dick has run
who's in the general, to Shannon, they are splitting the vote, apparently right down the middle. But with this, and there can't be another Republican that's left to vote in that district. So they got 1,000 of them. I didn't know there's 1,000 Republicans in District 33. If I was them, I'd move to Clackamas County in a hurry, before you're found out where you're at. So
because those 1,000 Republicans are going up against 10,613 Democrats. That does crack me up, Brian. And I've seen Dick's name on the ballot before. I think he's run, and I think Stan got it because he wasn't Dick. And, so good for them. A tough one, but maybe we'll have one of them on the podcast to talk about that close and hard fought primary.
Well, if the loser's moving out of there, they're not gonna be able to handle the shame of losing in the primary in Portland. Hey, Republicans, just so you're aware, that it's public record if you're a Republican in Southeast Portland living there, like they can figure that out. So just so just letting you know, make sure you're aware of that. So if you need to move to Clackamas County, you better, Ben West is waiting for you. So head on out there.
All right, House District 40 Republican primary, and I think this is setting up a key race in November. Clearly, Anessa Hartman, the incumbent Democrat, got 4,400 votes. The Republicans combined got 4,100 votes, and this was a very close one in 2022. Michael Newgard defeats Sue Leslie. I think both of them would have needed to build name ID in the general election, both starting from a very similar position. Michael takes this one and will, ramp up for the fall.
Well, this was a good test. I mean, the vote count for both sides were fairly similar. I think you now have an incumbent in Anessa Hartman, which is going to give her an advantage going into the general for sure. Speaking of voting record that we talked about with Charlie Conrad, I would say that she did about all that she could do to try to portray herself as a moderate in the building. So I think that she's done a decent amount of work in that respect, including even dating a Republican. So I think that's interesting. But we'll find out in the 40 where this one goes. I think Michael Newgard's got a really good resume, but I didn't see a lot of fundraising activity on his side of the fence. I didn't see a lot of community support, which would concern me. I've seen a lot, I saw Anessa raise a lot of money, mostly lobby money. So this could be the battle of, who can get outside groups to bring in enough money, because this was a close one, 160 votes or so in the 2 years ago. So it should be close again. I mean, the way it's stacking up, regardless of what happens, it'll be a close. I think this will be a close battle. I think it's the lot. It's truly that Clackamas Multnomah County line. It's like the DMZ between Portland and Clackamas County. So it should be an interesting race. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. Another one of the key races in the fall, HD 48. We've got Andrew Morrison and John Masterman that were competing. Masterman really ran away with this one. And Brian, I think you and I both called that mostly because Masterman was on the ballot last time, got extremely close. And I think the Republicans down there want to give him another shot. Ultimately, Masterman also ran more as a conservative. He really wanted to earn the Republican vote. I think, Andrew is probably a nice guy. I met him, but it seemed like he was running a general election campaign in a primary. And that doesn't work when you've got competition, when you're competing there. They competed. Masterman won. Masterman now needs to load up to take on Hua Wen in the general election. This one, the deficit much bigger in the voting, but I think 48 may be partially covered by one of those high turnout congressionals that really drove some extra turnout. So I expect this one to be pretty close in the fall.
Yeah, I hope so. I think these were definitely, the Democrat numbers were a little higher, and I think you're probably right, probably because of the CD3 race that was probably driving some more of those people to the polls than Republicans had nothing to vote for there. So the one, I'll make this note. So the Willamette Week, I went through their endorsements, and they got every one of their candidates right except for this race. They chose Andrew Morrison in their race. So it tells you that the Willamette Week, and they didn't really choose many Republicans. Oh wait, they're also behind in because they chose Dick Corder in that race with Baumhofer. So in the two races that they're behind in Willamette Week, they're both Republican races. Go figure. That they don't know what's going on in some of our Republican primaries. But I think you're right. I think Masterman. It's also a unique name. You and I talked a lot about political branding and stuff like that. You kind of don't forget it. Morrison's kind of just an everyday, if I was him, I would have had a logo like the bridge. I'd have done something, like tying the Morrison Bridge, or, you know what I mean? Like there could have been so many things you could have done there to help that voter retention of your name that they didn't do. And I know Masterman, we know who ran his race, and Masterman's race, and I know who ran the other guy's race, and I'll bet on David Collada any day and twice on Sunday in that matchup. So especially with a guy like Masterman who just works. I mean, he was out doing doors, and the dude will go knock on doors. So props to him. Hopefully now he knocks on not the Republican doors, but really knocks on those swing voters and those swing Democrats, and really tells them that the Democrats really have failed those people in Southeast Portland, Foster Road area, and that's really where it needs to be won.
Masterman, it makes me think of Fetterman, and those are just like two of those last names that really stick with you.
Yeah.
And I think he's got kind of the same working class vibe, honestly. Masterman doesn't wear a hoodie or gym shorts, but
Good.
I think he's a mechanic, and I think that kind of, as corny as it is, I think if I were him, I'd almost consider knocking doors while carrying a wrench just for fun, just to kind of build that persona and kind of make it fun and get people excited.
Idea.
So
that's a great idea. Even change his logo a little bit, make an outline with a wrench, and I'm here to fix things, right? So
David loves my feedback on logos, so I will definitely make sure to send that to him. I'm always giving him a hard time about his logos, so that'll be good. Another Republican primary, HD 51. Christine Drazen comes back to the legislature, sends James Heeb packing. I think I speak for a lot of people saying really appreciate James Heeb, appreciate a lot of the stuff he tried to do, especially when it came to his troubled background, his family's history of suicide and drug abuse, and really hope the best for him. But I think that voters were looking for someone a little bit more ready to take on the legislative process in this particular primary. And Drazen obviously had a big, strong list, did some decent fundraising and some numbers, and had some name ID left over that I'm sure came in handy here in this primary as well. You're running for governor and all that.
$20 million in name ID doesn't disappear overnight, but it does disappear. It wasn't quite there yet, but I think Oregon Firearms was gone and heavy on James Heap here. Apparently that worked out well for him. I think I just think that area of Clackamas County is, it's kind of a growing area, and I think there's a lot of people there that want to see things still happen. I think a lot of those folks were big supporters of Drazen when she was running for governor, and I think nothing wrong with that. I don't necessarily share the same insights that you do on James Heap, but I just think that Drazen will make a better state representative. I'll leave that at that.
That is what I hear from a lot of people. And again, I don't think it's anything necessarily against Heap, but I think, he struggled some, and I think there's personal struggles that he'll have a chance to work on outside of the limelight of politics. And that limelight is usually makes the issues worse. It doesn't help you fix them, typically, is what we see a lot of times. So, well, now we head to the Senate, and this is one of those places where, we had a couple of these races go different direction, but we'll start with the first district, David Brock Smith. I think 56% is a good showing for David Brock Smith, especially with 3 opponents. I think even if Todd Vaughn was the only guy running against him, Brock Smith probably does 56% or better, just because of the attacks really fell flat there and lacked believability. Again, I think they calling him communist Chinese stooge, and that's just not the vibe you get from David Brock Smith. Maybe there's another legislator out there really shilling for China, but David Brock Smith's not one of them. So he gets 56%. Todd Vaughn comes in second, 29%. Paul Romero, who didn't really campaign, got 8%, and Ashley Hicks 5%. So that was, I think, what the conventional wisdom really suspected, but Ben Edel didn't really have a good night there. Won his own uncontested primary, but not this one.
Yeah, Ruck Pack's killing it.
All right, and then we go to State Senate District 2. This one's a heartbreaker. Christine Goodwin does not beat Noah Robinson. That Robinson name seems to be pretty entrenched out there in Southern Oregon.
Yeah, it sure does. I think. We spent a lot of money in this race. Noah, to his credit, raised a decent amount of money. I think raised $130,000 or so. So, he didn't roll over. There's no doubt about it. So I think this combination of the Robinson name and Josephine County and down in that southern area where they've been on the ballot all over the place, and Goodwin, I think, had a lot of smoke around her residency. Where she was actually living, and they filed a lawsuit, and then they dropped the lawsuit, and she never got to win the lawsuit in court. So it kind of just hung out there, and there was a lot of, that created a lot of anti Goodwin stuff that I think kind of built out of there, gave him a reason to go pounder, and it worked. There's really not much you can do about it. The biggest thing I'll say here is, we pulled the race first part of May. Some other people pulled the race as well, and it didn't show this. It showed a very tight race. So I don't know if they pulled the wrong people, or maybe they weren't intentional. So I'm not sure. I think Robinson's put up a lot of signs. I'll tell you. I went down there one time, and they own a sign making company, so their ability to put up signs is insanely practical. That's for sure. They can do it. They can just print. And that doesn't come out into that $130,000 in cash, right? I don't even see even many in-kinds at all from Bridgeview Press to his PAC. So who knows how much of that never even got accounted for. So I don't know what a sign on every street corner is worth, but it's worth something. That's for sure. So props to Robinson for winning. It's kind of all I got to say on that one. I think that Christine's a friend, and we tried doing everything we could there to help get her over the top, but there was no crack in that nut. That's the reality of it. The polling told us differently, but the polling was wrong. And we've never heard that before.
Yeah, I think also these primaries, the undecideds can break late and they can break hard. I think that's also, we've seen that is a true thing. And I had that happen on a local levy here where the polling, said one thing and the outcome said a totally different thing. So I hear that. Senate District 28, I think Diane Linthicum, 59%, pretty solid showing. Really another place where that name ID is pretty well established. Dave Hensley gave it a good shot. Got 40% of the vote, but that wasn't as much of a high spending affair. And I think Hensley probably needed some more money, a good chunk more money to really drive home and make that one super competitive. Would be my guess, without not knowing a lot about what happened on the ground there. But Diane Linthicum will succeed her husband there in Senate District 28 and increase the number of women in the Senate Republican caucus again.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I think also too, if you look at your ballot, right, you're gonna vote for Dennis Linthicum, and then it literally could be the next name is State Senate 28, and you're voting for Diane Linthicum. So I think that was probably a big piece of that institutional name ID. I think also too, Reagan, we don't really give ourselves, because we're never good at giving ourselves credit. So let's give ourselves some more credit. We branded Oregon's 13 and the walkout so well that the Linthicum name and the Robinson name became folk heroes, in these communities. So, we almost were too good doing the PR work we did when the Senate Republicans walked out, and we were both in the caucus office, doing PR. So yeah, maybe we take our hat off for that one. I don't know, but Dennis and Diane have been around a long time in those areas down there. Names been on about a lot, and it's pretty tough to overcome without having a lot of money. And also too, the percentage of voter score was similar to Senate District 2. So I do think you have, of the people who turned out, you do really have what I talked about with in that news article that we led the show off with, is this kind of more obstructionist, version of a Republican to a more, right-leaning Republican, but not necessarily in an obstructionist mentality of just vote no matter what. We don't care about money in our district. We don't care about better roads. We don't care about sewers, water, all that sort of stuff. We just want you to vote no. So there's just a certain group of those, and I would imagine it's not all 60% that voted for Diane, but of those people that are in that mentality, they're definitely going towards a Diane Linthicum versus a Dave Hensley, because I watched one of their debates, and you could clearly see that there was two distinct, even though politically they probably are the same person, they align politically, and I'd say Christine and Noah are the same, right? They probably align the same. It's just how they go about legislating in Salem, I think, is really the chasm that the two races had in common, I think. So we'll see.
Makes sense to me, Brian. And then finally, we rounded out here in the legislature, State Senate District 29. I think this one caught people by surprise, not because Todd Nash was the winner. He again locked up that Oregon Right to Life endorsement. He had the Oregon Firearms Federation endorsement until they unendorsed him. His stance on the Second Amendment in that time, this campaign, didn't change that I'm aware of. So I'm interested to get into that at some point. But for some reason, they withdrew that endorsement. But I think, by the time they got through the primary, it was like, what was the point of withdrawing it? And then he had like timber union stuff, and those were all sole endorsements. I think that gave him an edge on the conservative front to lock in the conservative voters. But he still had a really good reputation of being somebody that worked with other people. And that's what prevented Drotzman and Doherty, really, I think, from getting a strong foothold, either one of them, and erasing the other. They both kind of cut into each other's bases on the western half of that district. The shocking part to me was Drotzman coming in third at something I wasn't necessarily predicting looking at that race. Nash and Drotzman were really the kind of early spenders, but Doherty poured on the late money, had some stumbles, ran into some political and real fences. I think that created a little bit of a challenge for him when he had a chance to pick up that momentum. And so Nash kind of wins in a very convincing manner there with 53 percent.
Well, my take is, besides your fun Doherty comment, I think definitely two takes on this. One, I think we didn't see Doherty coming in. Second, I think that's a pretty interesting. I don't know that area as well. I hadn't spent Gobb's amount of time up there, so I didn't know that he had a lot of institutional coming from Sherman County. It's a pretty small county. But really, what Senator Hansel told us rang true. Looking at the county results, I mean, they were pretty evenly spread until you got to Union County. That you get to the east side of the Blue Mountains, Todd Nash won 73% of the vote in Union County. So, and then in Wallowa County, where he's from, 81% of the vote. So his margins and the gross numbers there truly made the difference. Those folks on the east side of the Blue Mountains were not voting for somebody on the west side of the Blue Mountains. And that's clearly a geographical block of voters that Nash put in his pocket, and they weren't moving. So I think that's just looking at the county by county numbers. It was very clear that the number, and he even won Umatilla, but by a very small margin, Todd Nash. So I think that good race for him. I think he's a likable guy. I think there's a lot of that kind of comes along with it, but he had enough institutional support. But I really think that he overcame any sort of challenge by being the only one on the east side of the Blue Mountains. That made a difference because he really locked up that vote.
And there was really not, I mean, I couldn't find anything that was really negative that people were saying about him. And I think when you have a candidate, I think he's one of those unique ones that are just like so well liked overall, generally, that you just can't. How are you going to oppose him? What are you going to say about him? He's too nice. Like, I just think like that at that point, that comes to be the only thing that you've got. And I think there weren't a lot of negatives there. Drotzman and Doherty both had political histories, Drotzman at the city, and it's really hard to be working for a city and not say you need more property tax or other kind of revenue. And so I think that really hurt him. And then, Doherty, fighting out his recall and other stuff, I think it just made it so that Nash was kind of the obvious choice for a lot of people. And I agree. I love Todd Nash. I got to meet him. I was on the Oregon Right to Life PAC board that endorsed him. I think he's going to be great for that area. Really excited to see him win that race. Any closing thoughts, Bryan? We're getting a little long in the tooth here, so I think we're going to do a part 2 because there's a lot of local races to break down, and so we'll probably do at least another hour on those. I think even just the Multnomah, Clackamas, and talking about those, there's a ton to talk about there, so we're going to save everybody's ears and do that another time.
I agree. I think there was some interesting stuff that happened on the local side, some unintended consequences of some of those things that we can kind of dive into and then kind of start previewing the fall as we get to it. But I think with the legislative stuff, I think the key is to remember that we are, as Republicans, arguing underneath the same tent, and out of this, we gotta go forward and henceforward, I think that, the House Republican caucus lost, two of their incumbents, were taken out basically. And that's pretty interesting. And I think the Senate Republican, we knew there was going to be a lot of primaries because of the walkout, and that creates usually some fighting, and they're usually a little more intense on the Senate side just because you're fighting for a 4-year seat instead of a 2-year seat. So I think sometimes that ratchets up the intensity a little bit. But it is what it is. Like, you're going to have battles with primaries and you move on. I think there's some hurt feelings probably out there on some of these, but it's no different than, I think DeSantis is probably still pissed at Trump that he lost the primary to him and couldn't go on and become the presidential nominee. But it doesn't mean that he's not going to support Donald Trump in the general, So, and the same thing with the Democrats. I'm sure there was, I'm sure Doyle Cannon's pissed at, Fragola, but it's not like she's going to become a Republican. And I think we just have to remember that when we talk about these primaries, that they're primaries within your own house. You're having an argument, you're going to beat each other up a little bit, and then you move on, right? But it's and I would just say, have a very, very wake up with amnesia, as they say. Term goes, and move on. I have a few campaign managers that I've had to, talk off the ledge with some stuff and just say, oh, you can't win every time. You got to just, you take your wins, you take your losses, and you get up and you move forward, and that's just the reality of it. So wish everybody
It's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a good point, Brian. I saw Democrats on Twitter talking about Maxine Dexter, that like she's bought by Republican Israel money. And I was like, that doesn't mean she's going to start voting the Republican line. Like, people take that stuff way too far. She's going to be a reliable progressive vote. Trust me on this one. She's going to have a 99% with Biden, 99% with Nancy Pelosi voting record. Like, that is a given here. And I think, people really blow that stuff out of proportion. The problem is that they're so far on the edge of their party that they think anybody in the middle of their party is a right-wing extremist. And that's like the problem. This is like, if you're pro-Israel, that's like still the majority opinion in the Democratic Party and in America. Yeah. And they're just, way on the outside there. Well, thanks, Brian, for your insights. It's always great to have you bring your perspective, because you've got a lot of knowledge about these races. You ran the House Republican races 2 years ago, so a lot of these districts and how they behave and a lot of these candidates, and so it's great to have your input. Looking forward to discussing these local races with you here next time. We'll try to get those out quickly so that people can get their fix after the election.
Right. Good to speak with you, Reagan. It's always fun having a millennial co-host. So I appreciate that, especially with babies at home. It's fun. I appreciate you and the insight you bring me. So I don't want to be old, crotchety, consultant that loses his edge. So you keep me going. Talk to you soon.
You're welcome, Brian. Thanks, everybody.